This very congenial speaker, good morning, is Mr. Sam Black, and he's the author of Healing Church, What Churches Got Wrong About Pornography and How to Fix It. The Director of Recovery Education at Covenant Eyes, Sam joined the Covenant Eyes team in 2007 after 18 years as an award-winning journalist. He has edited 16 books on the impact of pornography and speaks at parents, men's, and leaders' events. Sam has been a guest on hundreds of podcasts and TV and radio shows. Sam also wrote The Porn Circuit, Understand Your Brain and Break Porn Habits. Sam is passionate about helping Christians live free from pornography because he knows you keep what you give away. He walks his own grace-filled journey with the support of valued allies. So welcome, Sam.
You guys are so good looking. I've just got to do this real quick. Give me a big wave if you would. Just big wave. Come on, yeah, woo! Okay, thank you. All right, go back to my timer here. It was a cold, dark, wet night in Michigan, and the tires were spinning, the engine was revving, mud was flying everywhere, and we were going nowhere fast. You see, just a few minutes earlier, we had watched my son perform in his middle school play at the community center. And my wife and my daughter and I are walking out to the parking lot, and my daughter has just gotten her driver's permit. Any parents had a son or daughter with a driver's permit? That's exciting times, right? They can't wait to drive anytime they get a chance. And so she runs up behind me, grabs the keys out of my hand, runs to the car and says, "Dad, I'm driving us home." We climb in, and she looks over her shoulder and she sees that there's this massive line of cars also wanting to leave that parking lot. And she's impatient and she doesn't want to wait. And she looks through the windshield and she sees this perfectly grassy plain that leads right to the road. And she says, "Dad, I'm going through there." And I said, "Wait, no, Hannah, stop." And she says, "Dad, I got this." And she hits that gas pedal, thrusts that car into that grass. And of course, it sinks right down to the axles. And she's revving the engine and the mud is flying, but she is stuck. Oh no, right? What's going to happen now? Now, it would have been perfectly legitimate for me to lean over the seat to her and say, "Listen, Hannah, I just want to let you know, if you go into that grassy area, it's muddy, you're going to get stuck." And she'd been like, "Dad, we are stuck. I don't know if you know that or not, we're stuck." And I'd say, "Well, you don't understand. If you go into the grass, you're going to get stuck." "Dad, I'm stuck already." And my wife, being, the great matron of her family that she is, she could have said, "Listen, your dad is right. If you go into the grass, you're going to get stuck." But isn't that what we often do in our congregations today? Pornography's wrong. Don't do that. God hates that. Quit that. Stop that. Don't do that. And they're like, "I'm already stuck. Can you help me find a way out?" I've spent 18 years at Covenant Eyes. And on a recurring basis, I would hear people say, "Listen, Sam, I love living in freedom today. This is a beautiful thing. I can't believe the recovery and support I've received. But the truth is, my church didn't help me very much." That is not how it should be, right? That's not how it should be. So Paul starts off Galatians 6, and he starts off in the beginning, he says, "Listen, you who are spiritually mature, if someone's caught, trapped, ensnared, you who are spiritually mature, gently correct." Now he's very, very specific about this. You who are spiritually mature. gently correct. And then he skips gears there really quickly and he goes, listen, if you are going to reap what you sow. If you sow to the flesh, you're going to reap to the flesh. You're literally going to change your brain to crave the very things you say you hate. So be warned. But if you sow to the Spirit, if you sow toward recovery, that too could remap your brain. You were designed by God for recovery. You were designed by God to renew the mind. But he comes back to us and he says, let us not get tired of doing good, for we will reap at the proper time if we don't give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us work for the good of people that you don't know. No, that's not what he says there. He says, of all, especially to those who belong to the household of the faith. Within our community, within our church bodies, within our congregations, within our communities, that's where we should be working and supporting one another. We are called for more. I interviewed more than 70 people for this book. Went to churches across the United States to find churches that were doing this work well. What were they doing different that other churches can mimic and copy? And what were some mistakes that they made along the way? How can we learn from those? We looked at more than 70 studies, etc. And by the way, because you're at this conference, you can buy this book online if you'd like, $17.99 on Barnes & Noble or Amazon, whatever you like. We're going to give it away for free here. In fact, I brought a case of books. There's a case of books over here. And we're going to put them up by the door. And you just grab one while you're out. If we run out before that, go by my table and pick up a book there. It's free. It's for you. We want to equip you at Covenant Eyes to be the change agents. All right, the threat. We're going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about the miry threat, or the threat, the miry clay, how do people get stuck, and we're going to talk about the healing church. And I think the first thing you need to understand is I'm going to move this over here. Then I can just see where I'm going. Every ministry in your local congregation is being undermined by pornography. You're like, wait, Sam, you're really stretching here, aren't you? Every ministry in my community is being undermined by pornography? Well, let's walk through that a little bit. We know that nearly half of children are exposed to pornography by accident. They're not even going to look for it. That in 56% of divorce cases, a major contributing factor is one spouse's ongoing compulsive use of pornography. That we can see that 75% of men and 40% of women say they view pornography at least occasionally. But when you dig deeper into those figures, you find that, man, this looks a lot like compulsive behavior. When we dive deeper, we see that 42% of men are watching enough porn to be considered likely in a compulsive state, whether they recognize it or not. 36% of men 18 to 30 say they're watching pornography daily to anesthetize their moods, regulate their emotions. And when we say 27% of watching weekly, that doesn't mean just necessarily once a week. They just don't say they watch it at least daily. We're also seeing more women using pornography today. We began handing our daughters iPhones in 2007. Can you believe it's already been that long, 2007, we're in 2025. We've had these devices available for that long. And there's been a dramatic shift, I believe, in during that time. More women are using pornography. A number of studies were done that University of Oklahoma, some other universities, that found a direct correlation between pornography use and less prayer life, fewer scripture reading, lack of feelings of closeness to God, less volunteerism. That might shock you a little bit. The University of Oklahoma study found a direct correlation between how much pornography someone watched and whether they would serve in a volunteer position in their church over the next 6 years. We're wondering why we don't have the people to fill the slots. Well, maybe some of the impact of this is on our culture. We're doing a little bit better in the church than we have in the past. Or up to 10% of churches in the U.S. say they do something to help those who are struggling. We offer some kind of program, some kind of support. Meanwhile, 75% of pastors say they personally are helping and serving someone who says they're struggling with pornography. They're counseling them one-on-one. And 51% of the people they're counseling are married men. So the miry clay. If we can recognize the danger that's happening to our church communities, we need to understand, why do people get stuck? Why do they seem to stay stuck? Why do they promised themselves and others and God that they would never go here again, and yet it happens over and over again? So one of the basic principles, and I got a feeling that some of you are pretty familiar with some of this content, but some of you are not, so we got to just catch everybody else up to speed. 3 common factors. Now, I thought I was uniquely defective. But here are the 3 common factors that were common in my story and other stories I hear. Early exposure, the ongoing use and repetition, especially through adolescence, and some trauma or pain that's often happened early in life but can happen elsewhere as well. These 3 factors are very common. The average age for first exposure to pornography is somewhere between the ages of 8 and 11, depending on which study you're looking at. And that brain is, so we're going to walk through this, that brain is really susceptible to this. Now, dopamine fires off when sexual cues are picked up, even before a child even understands what they're feeling in their body. Their body just naturally reacts. Pornography is not sex. Pornography is a hijacking of what God created. In God's design, when sexual cues are picked up, dopamine fires off, focuses your attention on your spouse. The rest of the world disappears. You are one together. But the hijacking process, the dopamine says, hey, pay attention to this, focus on this. This looks exciting. I've not seen this before. And that's incredibly difficult for a child who's not been trained to understand, what do I do when I see pornography? I've never even had a discussion about this. And so that brain gets lit up with some dopamine, focuses their attention, because sexual cues naturally release dopamine. And then maybe this is a frightening situation. A lot of pornography today is very shocking, violent in itself. And so norepinephrine kicks off, and that is associated with fight or flight as well. Both dopamine and norepinephrine work together to build, solidify memories in the brain. So let me give you an example. I was 10 years old when I walked out of my home in Florida, and my brother and his best friend were standing against their car. He's 10 years older than me, and they were looking at a magazine sideways, and that just didn't make any sense. How could you look at a magazine how could you read sideways? These guys are so crazy. And they turned it around when I asked what they were looking at. Now, I can't tell you anything else about that day. But I just told you a complete and full story about the interactions I had on the first time that I saw pornography. And I can tell you that the vast majority of people I talk to who struggle with pornography addiction find that they can tell me a complete story about a grassy knoll where they found something, where they returned the cable box on the side that a cousin did it, or any number of things, right? And it's so impactful on the brain, on that child's brain, because the feeling part of the brain is very well developed, even in children. But the prefrontal cortex is not so much, right? Not until you get into your late 20s do you have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. This is why you pay so much for your kids' car insurance, right? True story. They love the excitement. They're driven by those feelings of adrenaline and excitement. And they're not afraid of that gas pedal. They're not afraid of risk. In fact, risk feels good to that feeling brain. But the prefrontal cortex, it says, I might get a ticket. I could crash my car. My insurance is going to go up. All those other kinds of things, that kind of goes to the side. They're missing the repercussions. So let's think about a child seeing pornography for the first time. They have this feeling brain that's very easily excited. Children are very excitable regardless, right? And they see pornography, they get the spritz of dopamine that hits their brain, and it feels good, and they can't look away unless they've been trained. I saw it over at the SA Lifeline table that they have a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Great teaching tool to help kids respond to know when they see pornography, they can turn, run, and tell. We can train our kids and equip them. But most parents don't do that because they believe 4 myths. The first myth is, my kid is a good kid. They would never be curious like I was curious. And number 2, if they did see something, they would just look away because, why? Because they're such good kids. I mean, we go camping together, we go hikes together, all these family activities together. They're just really good kids. And we miss how impactful it is on that young brain. Number 3, the measures I have in place are good enough. And usually what that means is I look over their shoulder occasionally to see what's happening. I cannot tell you the number of parents that I have spoken to who said, my child's first exposure to pornography happened on my watch, in my kitchen, in my car, in my living room, because, hey, they're just good kids. We didn't put any software on their devices to protect them. We weren't there was no accountability, there was no conversations, there was no training with a book like Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. We just knew our kids were good kids, and so we didn't do anything to really help them change. Let me give you this story I've heard multiple times, different variations of it. Mom and grandma are headed to a state park, and they're taking her son and cousin to the park, and she hands her phone over the back seat because she says, hey, Mom, we want to look up where we're going to see what kind of activities we're going to do. And she goes, okay, yeah, fine. Hey, do you mind if we play a game? Sure, yeah, occupy him. And cousin looks over and says, hey, I dare you to look up this word. And that was her 8-year-old son's first exposure to pornography in the backseat of her car while going to the state park. 8. Common. Number 5. This is the bonus. It's not even up there, right? Here's your bonus. If I talk to my kids about pornography, it'll just make them curious and they'll go look for it. Kids are already curious. There's an entire industry that's focused on getting as much pornography in the hands of as many people as possible, right? So it is imperative that you have conversations with your kids to equip them and train them, and we have to do that within the church. So why can't we have support tools that actually help you have conversations in your church and equip your parents, because your parents don't know what to do either. So we need to equip them. Repetition. The ongoing use and repetitive use, it's one thing to see pornography for the first time, it's another thing to do it over and over and over again. And it builds those neural pathways and begin craving it. And so those neurons that fire together, wire together, you've probably heard this before, and that repetition ingrains those neural pathways. But after a while, I'll come back to this. I'll come back. And so the brain and the psyche of the individual becomes stuck in what I like to call the porn rut. This is not a scientific word, I just made it up. Porn rut. But these are all in common addiction terms. The sensitization, after using pornography so many times, the brain becomes very sensitive to those cues and seek out porn. And so when the gentleman earlier talked about the ritualization, the rituals help, once that ritual starts, it's hard to stop the brain from going on to a relapse. Very, very difficult. The triggers. Triggers come, I call them C triggers, S-E-E, C. You remember this. S-E-E, social, emotional, and environmental. Social cues might be picked up by what you're watching with others, etc. Or your environmental might be you're driving down the road and see a billboard, or you have devices that are unprotected. Emotional cues are ones that I'm feeling angry, sad, frustrated, and I don't know how to sit with that emotion, Something you get to learn in 12-step, right? You get to be able to sit with your emotions, and because I can't self-regulate, I go back to the two things that's always been a fix for in the past. So I can run to pornography, self-soothe, to regulate my emotions, to anesthetize my moods. And desensitization. After a while, the brain says, listen, that amount of dopamine just doesn't make any sense. I've seen this before. So the neuron fires less dopamine, and the receptor blocks more dopamine, so we end up having to get a bigger dose. It's often the pornography industry loves to say how their clientele are asking for harder core, more intense, more varied, more angry and awful and violent. What they don't tell you is they've created it themselves. They've created this desensitization because having seen that, people say, I've heard many addicts say, I've gone places I never thought I'd go, do things I never thought I'd do, pay a price I never thought I'd pay. And it's because of that desensitization. They got to up the dosage to get that original high. And hyperfrontality, it just means a good word for that is compulsivity, a good exchange word. Having done this so much, having surrendered so many times to this, the brain just kind of naturally goes there. The person's thinking naturally goes there. All right, some trauma. It's one thing to see pornography, it's another thing to begin using it over and over again, but it's a different thing this is what kind of cements it all together. That often there's this pain, and people learn to, again, anesthetize their emotions and regulate their moods, and it comes from things like, you might think of physical violence, or verbal abuse, emotional abuse, not just in the home, maybe bullying at school or elsewhere. I had a friend, and his dad had pornography. Now I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but you see the gray, so I'm not hiding anything here today. I had a friend, and his dad had a stash of pornography that looked a little like a waterfall because it was in this closet. And when you opened up the closet, it was stacked, just your normal closet with a shelf on top and stacks of pornography, and it was kind of falling off, and there was a pile of it on the floor, and I could take anything I wanted, and I did. But the other part of that equation was that I also grew up in a violent home where my father raged, and it was unpredictable. And when I felt fear and frustration and anger, I could go to pornography and I could forget the whole rest of the world. Now, I didn't even realize that I was doing that. I was just a kid. But I could escape those emotions, those feelings with pornography. But those aren't the only kinds of things we see in our culture today, right? There's parental absence. Sometimes parents are absent just because they're trying to make ends meet, right? They're just trying to work 2 jobs or whatever it is just to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. Feeling unwanted. I spoke to a man, in fact, the opening chapter of the Healing Church talks about a man who he was born late in his parents' marriage, and it turned out that he was an unexpected pregnancy. One that his dad didn't very much appreciate, didn't like him, honestly. So he never heard his dad say, "I love you." Now, he would attend the sports games, etc., of his older siblings, but never had time for him. So why are you so dumb? Why do you have to be so stupid? That kind of wounding of just feeling unwanted. Divorce. It's hard. There's just things that happen in divorce. They're unintentional, often, but can be still impactful for that child. Here's one that's going to surprise you. Rigid rules. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying this is the kind of music we listen to, or the shows we go, or the movies we watch. That's fine. But we do it by instruction and support and a kindness. And we're training our kids, not just preaching to them, right? And so many rigid rules in households like that, it's simply a red line drawn in the sand, and to cross it is met with violence or anger, shame. They're not being taught. And so these wounds create this underlying belief system that creates a shaky foundation. It's very susceptible to triggers. And when those triggers happen, there becomes a preoccupation and a fantasy. You begin thinking about, how am I going to get to what I want to look at? What is the thing I want to look at? And then the ritual begins, and rituals used to be long. Today they're very short because we carry around these devices in our pockets. And so we can go to 0 to 1,000 in no time at all. When Covenant Eyes, we provide accountability and filtering software for phones, tablets, and computers. We've been doing this for 25 years again. Back in the day, before the iPhone came out in 2007, we would often hear about the stories of men and women who would find an excuse to stay home when the rest of the family was going to go out. So one man talked about, my wife we were all planning to go to my in-laws. We're going to meet with grandma and grandpa and have a fun time with them. But you know what? I made the excuse that I had all this work to get done around the house. And so part of my ritual was waving goodbye to the family so that I would have alone time with a computer that was connected to a tower. Right? Back in the day, you might not remember this, but there used to be these big monitors, and there was this tower. And so it wasn't a mobile device. Making excuses just for alone time. Getting up in the middle of the night to go view pornography because that's when everyone was asleep. These rituals began, and we hear people talk about, it was be laying there in bed and just this screaming in your head, stop it, stop it, stop it, I don't want to go look at pornography. But the ritual had already began, and they could not, they had that experience many times over of getting up in the middle of the night and going to view pornography. So the acting out happens, but then there is a moral incongruence with what's going on. I don't want to be like this. In fact, the things I just watched are totally against anything I would believe in or accept. I wouldn't want my daughter or my wife or my nieces or my mom to be in that situation. That looks awful. Jesus said, if you look at another with lust in your heart, didn't say about what they were doing or how they were acting or how they were clothed or not clothed or anything, but if whatever it is, that is pornography to you. And so that says, I want to be like Jesus. I don't want this in my life anymore. I want to please my spouse. I don't want this. As you were talking about Stephen, oh my goodness, and coming forward saying this burden I'm carrying, this moral incongruence I'm carrying is harming me in mind, body, and spirit. I can't take this. But that despair just reinforces a belief system that I'm never good enough. I'm never going to get this done. God is dissatisfied with me. I'm never going to make it. So what do? Hide. Hide and shame, and it just keeps going around and around and around. So what can we do? What does it look like to be a healing community where we can create meaningful change in people's lives? The church is God's plan. It is in the church where he brings healing and hope. I loved what was said earlier in our first session. That is beautiful. That it is within the church that we need to create help, hope, and healing. But we have a hard time doing this well. One of the foundational principles of the faith is to confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And I'll go to a small congregation and they'll say, listen, Sam, we really know each other pretty well. I mean, our kids go to school together. We know each other too well to have that kind of vulnerability. And then I'll go to one of these large mega churches or whatever, and I'll meet people and they say, oh, you work for Covenant Eyes, and with Covenant Eyes you have an ally, and they receive a report of how you're using their devices. But you know what? I can't find someone in this big church. I don't know someone well enough to be my ally that I can be that vulnerable with. It's not the size of the congregation that's the problem. We need to ask ourselves, what part of James 5:16 do we not believe? Safety within the church often exists on the spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum, it's very safe. Come as you are. Everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter what you're going through. In fact, we know everybody has things they're dealing with, but no one is ever called to change. Hey, you got problems, just keep them to yourself. That's okay. And on the other side, it's very unsafe. There was an elder of a church, and he went to his church board and he said, listen, I want you to know that I have been struggling with pornography. I don't want this in my life. I want hope, help, and healing. And their response to that was not only to remove him from the board, but ask him to never come back again. Very unsafe, performance-minded. If over here, no change, because everything is still left in hiding. We need to be somewhere here in the center. We're safe to come as you are, but we love you too much to let you suffer alone with that. That we'll come alongside you, and we can show you what you don't know. I'm going to skip forward, and I'll come back. I'll come back in just a second. Would you like your community just to be a little more safe? Would you just pull out your phone real quick for me? I want to give you some stuff that's free. It's free 99. Free 99, all right? Just scan this QR code and we'll send you a kit. And this kit includes action steps that you can take in the moment. So when someone says, hey, I'm struggling, you have these 5 different cards that you can hand right there in the moment for a woman who's struggling with pornography. We have a program called Arise, beautifully filmed. All of our course content within it has been CSAT counselor reviewed. And it takes them on a 21-day journey to help them understand, how did I get here? Why do I seem to stay stuck? How can I take meaningful steps toward freedom? Within our congregations, we offer very little support for women who struggle with pornography. We also have a program called Strive. It's a 21-day program for men. Again, video. We cut back on the writing just a little bit because we know that guys' attention spans, we got to pay attention to that. But it allows you to say, oh, I have an answer to that. Here. So we're going to send you a kit with 10 of those cards. We've got ones for couples. We talked about families. We've got resources for families, how to educate your parents about what if their child has been exposed to pornography before. How do you have a conversation about that? How do you help them when you find out? How do you prevent it from happening in the first place? As well as for ministry leaders. So, I'm going to back up to this. We need to help people become clear, committed, and connected. Clear because most people have no idea why they are stuck where they're at. There's just this belief, even among leaders, that suddenly confronted with pornography, I just need to make a good choice. And that's not the factor at all. It is so rooted, so deeply, they don't know how they got there. And for the struggler, as well as the church, we often want a quick fix. We want easy change. We want things to happen very fast. Maybe I can say a prayer. Maybe if I just confess this and I got it out of my life, hey, everything's better now. But we don't. That's not true. We also need to make sure we're caring for our spouses. That's why within the 5 stones, we have a resource just for helping couples understand this betrayal trauma and its impact. So often we just simply forget about the spouse. I was talking to a group of counselors, and in the book, this is one of the stories in there, and a spouse, a wife comes to her pastor and says, listen, man, this pornography thing, and I got to let you know, my husband's been struggling with pornography. He says it's been going on for a while, and he begins asking her some questions, and he's really listening, and man, she feels so heard. Like, man, he's going to talk to my husband. They're going to start meeting and praying or doing some things. I don't know what all that's going to happen. But later that night, the pastor's wife calls and says, "Hey, do you mind if I stop over tomorrow?" She says, "Yeah, that's fine." But now she wonders, now does my pastor's wife know what I told him? Wasn't that supposed to be confidential? And the next day when the pastor's wife shows up, well, it's not just the pastor's wife, it's the associate pastor's wife too. Now does the associate pastor's wife know? And the associate pastor? And who else in the church knows? What else is going on here? And they're each carrying a box. And they come into their home, and she opens up the box, and it's full of lingerie. She gets it. She's not enough. If she just did more, gave more, loved more, did more, of course we know none of that is true. He entered the marriage using pornography since childhood. When they were dating, he was using pornography. When he said, "Will you marry me?" he was using pornography. When she says yes and when she says no, still using pornography. We need to provide greater support and healing for spouses rather than offering cheap answers. The journey to recovery is indeed a journey. It's not a quick fix. God can heal people of anything. People put down booze and cigarettes and alcohol and drugs, etc. But often he calls on us for childlike faith, and helplessness, dependence, over time. Helping someone address pornography in their life is a great opportunity for discipleship because they are truly lost. They have no idea why they're staying so stuck. Here's among the benefits that will come for your church, your community. People who go through a healing process, a safe place and a safe process, and they do it well, they come out on the other side more self-aware, spiritually aware. They open up the closets where everything is stuffed in there and hidden, and they begin dealing with emotions that, instead of blowing up in an argument, like pornography is that self-soothing thing, but they haven't learned to self-regulate their emotions and anger and frustration and all these other things. You know, in the last session, sobriety is not healing. Sobriety is not healing because you can be sober and still be a jerk. But a healing journey allows you to address those wounds so you can be more self-aware. You can regulate your emotions. You can sit with that anxiety or fear or frustration. Or you practice disciplines that help you self-regulate and live a better life. And the cool thing is, people who do that, they want to give back. They give away the freedom they've received. So it makes your community stronger. And we found, as I was writing this book, interviewing more than 70 ministry leaders across the United States, that was what was happening. These ministry leaders were saying, since we began doing this work, our attendance has grown, the people that are in the programs, their faith is stronger, their prayer life, their scripture life, everything is going better. They're just more whole as a person. And they're saying, hey, pastor, I can do that. You need somebody to do that? I can counsel that person. I can mentor that person. I'll step up. I had one pastor said, Sam, you've got to understand something. I don't do more work now, I do less. Because we've cultivated a body within our local community that can tend to those wounds. We are here supporting one another. I'm going to leave this up here for you. Again, resources for men, women, families, for parents. for spiritual leaders themselves, and it's all free. And we just send you a kit. We have 5 minutes for questions. Let me answer. Yes, sir.
So it's easy to send somebody with challenges to a pastor or a church leader or a professional. If the leader knows what's your role.
We are all part of a community of healers, right? We're not called to be on the sidelines. We who are spiritually mature, that doesn't say pastor, just who are spiritually mature, gently correct, right? Well, so if we've gone through some recovery, if we have that knowledge ourselves, do some study. By the way, remember, this book is it right there? Is that box of books right there? So, if you'd like a copy of this book, The Healing Church, What Churches Get Wrong About Pornography and How to Fix It, how do you begin changing culture in your congregation to create lay people that can step up and help and support, grab a copy. If we run out of there's more on my table. You can, if you want to buy it online, it's $17.99 on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but we're giving it away here for free. Yes, sir.
I've got two questions. The first one, your story about the pastor who involved his wife and obviously that's a very extreme example, but it did cause me to wonder, is there an appropriate place for a male church leader who has been received confession and confidence? Is there an appropriate space for him to involve maybe a spouse or women from the congregation in an effort particularly to minister to the spouses?
Beautiful question. The question was, as a male leader, and a woman comes to you and says, hey, this is the struggle we're having in our marriage. Is it okay to bring someone else in? Of course it is, with permission, right? We say, listen, we've equipped a member of our team that can really help you, or a woman in our church who's spiritually mature that can help you walk this path. We've got the Healing Church that we've gone through. We've gone to other educational resources, and we have some tools that can help. Do you mind if I share that with you? Because I think you're going to be better equipped talking to her, maybe identify with her better than you would with me, right? Make sense? Yes, sir.
My other question, I love how you talk about volunteerism in your church experience. And I gather from this that there's this idea that people who feel called to step up, they offer to serve, and they're allowed to serve. People using pornography may be less inclined to do that. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, many of whom are here today,
Yeah.
there's, I think, a different dynamic
Yes.
where we rely less on volunteers, but more on requests from leaders to serve, a calling from a church leader. And there's a sense that in order to be called, you have to be worthy. And if you're using porn, you're not worthy, and you're not going to be called. That, of course, creates a cycle of shame for pornography.
Right.
But I wonder what you might teach us with respect to leaders. How can we approach this relationship with the best using pornography, who want to stay connected, want to be engaged, want to have a following, want to serve? What would you suggest to us in the way that we approach?
Great question. I want to hit that with two answers, a double answer here. One is, as I was writing the book, and my experience showed that many people who are serving in the church and struggling with pornography do all the more. Because if I can serve a little more in my family, if I can serve more in my local congregation, if I can serve more in my community, if I'm a little better dad, a little better mom, then maybe my sin isn't quite so bad. So if I just cover that up a little bit, I can't go and confess it now. It's too weighty. So I'll just get some good behavior behind me, and then maybe I'll be worthy enough to come forward. So I've got to do some stuff, right? That's one problem we see among leaders. Second is we create a culture within our church. It's okay to come as you are, wherever you're at, even those in the faith. And if we can create safe place, safe process, which we cover a lot in creating culture in the church, that allows someone a leader who's struggling to get help and ask for help, which is 10 times better than later on being found out and causing division and strife. Does that help answer your question? Yes.
And as part of that same church, I just wanted to say that I've been an ARP missionary for a little bit, and there's a lot of safe spaces there to open up and share.
Yeah.
A lot of healing that goes on there in those rooms, and also for spouses, there's really often a good thing going there, and that I have seen myself some really wonderful things happen with promoting this culture, and it helps teach people how to advocate for themselves
Yeah.
in the community, and that does a lot of really good work so that we're not alone and we have that community and have that faith-centered approach to
And that's the whole key, right? The opposite of addiction is connection.
and my bishop have my goals.
Will you repeat that for us?
I'm not sure it can.
I use and it helps people to advocate within their communities so that it's one of the things that it teaches of many things. It helps people to advocate for themselves and learn how to discuss these things with others, and it helps promote a lot of healing. And so these spaces do exist. Sometimes we do have to learn how to advocate and how to talk and how to be honest.
Yeah.
And my bishop had my entire congregation go through an ARP process just to help bring everyone in and help with addiction and things like that.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's just creating a healing community, right? We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming. God bless you.